Today, I'm going to show you how conditioning and form really work in Master League. Stay tuned. Hey guys, so today we're going to be talking about picking your squad. There's some really important dynamics about picking your squad that you have to know to make sure that you're getting the best out of your players. One of the key things to picking the squad is understanding two key factors. The first one of those factors is going to be player conditioning. And so I'll explain to you how player conditioning works, what some of the concepts are, what Konami says about it, and then generally what I found in the research that I'm doing. And it's really interesting. I highly recommend you stay to the end of the video because you're going to find out some really important factors around how player conditioning actually works versus what Konami say, based on my research. The second factor is going to be player form. And this is also a really important concept because player form is dynamic in both Master League and my club. All of my analysis and research has been specifically done in Master League, so I can't 100% say that this applies to my club, but for Master League for sure, the results I have with the data points I have suggests that in Master League, conditioning and form are going to work in the way that I'm going to show you today. So let's get into conditioning. So conditioning is a stat that you can find in your player abilities tab, and it's on the second portion of the abilities tab, all the way at the bottom. And I've highlighted here, and you can see that conditioning is a rating between 1 and 8. 8 being the highest, 1 being the lowest. The way that conditioning is explained in all the documentation and other videos that I've watched, conditioning is the ability to maintain form over time. Basically what that means is that if I play really well and I get a green arrow, in the next game, I should be able to maintain that arrow, or maintain a type of form that's close to that arrow. So having a really high conditioning rating of 8, for example, you would think that I would be able to string together multiple games where I have high form. Now, let's talk about form. So we've already established conditioning is the ability to maintain form. The concept of form is pretty simple. Let's say you have an 80 rated player, this guy, Pulisic. He's a decent player, feels good on the pitch. When you introduce form, that player is going to feel different. And he feels different specifically because form is going to change his in-game stats for that specific game. Now there are 5 form tiers. Green arrow pointing up is the first tier, the best tier. This tier generally, you're going to see about a 10% boost in the player rating. The next level is the light green arrow that's pointing diagonally upwards. In this one, you're going to see about a 5% boost. Then there's the yellow arrow that's pointing to the right. This means that your player rating is going to directly be reflected in game, and you have the same exact rating and ability level as you did when you looked on your team sheet prior to starting the game. So there's no modification for this level or tier rating. Then you have the orange arrow pointing down. In this case, you're going to see about a 5% loss of rating and overall ability. And then lastly, the red arrow pointing all the way down. In this one, you're going to experience about a 10% dip in overall rating and ability. So if we go back to our Pulisic, who's 80 rated, if this player has a green arrow pointing upwards, that 80 rated Pulisic on the pitch is going to feel like he's 88 rated, which means he's going to feel a lot better. He's going to be a lot more accurate in his shots. He's going to be faster. He's going to have better balance. All around, he's going to be much more dangerous. It also means that his offensive awareness and off the ball abilities when you're not controlling him are also going to be much better. Now, if we take that same scenario and our 80 rated Pulisic has a down red arrow, now instead of feeling like he's 88 or even 80, he's going to feel like he's about 72. Now, firstly, from an upward green arrow to a downward red arrow, you can see that's a difference in a rating of around 16 points. In general, that's a feel like stat difference between your 80 rated Pulisic and Lionel Messi. So, going back to the feels like rating, on your downward red arrow, Pulisic, instead of having a rating of 80, now has about a 10% decrease in skill that gives him a rating of 72. Now these aren't exact. There are other people that have videos on exactly which stats are reduced and how much they're reduced by, but this is a general rule that I believe is approximately accurate. So now you know a little about form and how it changes a player. Let's talk about how it's generated. So form is basically like gambling. So every time you roll the dice and every single time you play a game, you are rolling for a specific form stat. The condition rating is supposed to help increase the chances of getting a better form stat or decrease the chances of getting a lesser form stat. So in theory, in each match, you should be able to roll, and if you get good form, be able to maintain that form across multiple matches. But each individual match, you do roll for form. That form only sticks with you for a single match. So whatever you get in match 1 might be different than what you get in match 2. Form is a single game roll, and the results and benefits and boosts that you get from that single game roll are not carried through to the next match. You will re-roll form for your next match, and whatever the results of that re-roll are will then be applied in-game to only that specific match. Now again, condition is supposed to help maintain the form based on the previous game. Just keep that in mind for now. So to the test that I did, I had over 1,500 data points, which means that player match combinations have allowed me to matrix scenarios in which form was generated. To generate that form, I specifically used players with a condition rating between 8 and 4. I chose specifically not to use 3, 2, and 1 because I felt that in most cases, no one's using those players anyway. And I wanted to understand what the fall-off was between an 8 rated player to a 7 rated player, to a 6, to a 5, to a 4, and see if there were significant drop-offs before I went and experimented with 3, 2, and 1. The results of this are extremely interesting. You should definitely stay tuned. So once I did my test, the first thing I did was look across all form and aggregate over the 1,500 data points what the general result was on average of all of the different performance levels. Now what's interesting here is what I found in general was across all of the players, the bulk of the form tended to be a mid-level form, or a level 3, or a good form, which is a level 2. So over 80% of the time, most players were getting a form level that was either average or just above average. Now outside of that, what you can see is 10% of the time, a player was below average, which means that you're paying for a player in your squad that 1 out of every 10 matches is going to deliver a subpar performance and feel under-leveled in the game. And then about 7% of the time, I saw most players get a maximum boost, which is making them play much better than their actual stats. When you add this all up, on average, 1 out of every 10 games, a player is going to underperform. And so these should be your baseline expectations on any player that you own. So this was really interesting in itself, but this wasn't the most interesting piece of the analysis. The most interesting component was this. So I'll walk through how this works. I have a list of players over here that you can see their names in the left-hand column under name. Next to that, I have a form column, and that form actually represents the condition stat. In the columns next to form, you're actually going to see the aggregated form percentage that that specific player hit across all of the games that were played. And then I've grouped those statistics and drawn a line between at or above the stats listed on their attribute page, or when they got form that would make them underperform the attributes listed on their attribute page. So we'll cover the core high-level findings first. What you can see as you look across all condition ratings 8 through 4 is that on average there isn't that much change. A slight increase in condition 7 players and a slight decrease in condition 5 players. Those increases and decreases, however, are primarily driven by one player in each of those brackets, and this is where it gets interesting. Let's look at a couple specific players. Let's start off with Cruz. Right at the top, he has a form of 8, which means on average you would think that he's going to perform extremely well. However, what I noticed was each player seems to have a specific performance pattern. As you can see with Cruz, even though he had 8 condition, he rarely ever was able to achieve the best form, and the majority of the time he was either good or average. However, 16% of the time he was below average. Now I don't know about you, but if I'm paying the salary and transfer fee for a player like Cruz, I want him to be at least 9 out of 10 when it comes to at or above the skills listed on his attribute chart. So let's skip down to another major player, Messi. This shocked me, and I've seen this when I've used him in my club as well. His form always seemed really inconsistent, and I'd always thought it was somewhat random. But as you can see here, Messi hardly ever gets top form, but pretty frequently got bottom form in relation to other players. You can see 17% of the time he was underperforming against the stats listed in his stat sheet. That's pretty huge for a player like Messi. And considering how much you're paying for him, that's pretty disappointing. But he has 8 conditioning. So what does this mean? Well, I'll cover a couple other players and then tell you what I think. Let's skip down to condition 7. So you've got 3 players here, Mbappe, Ronaldo, and Van Dijk. What was interesting about Mbappe is if you own Mbappe, in the first couple of seasons of Master League, what you're actually going to get is a performance boost based on player growth. So he'll go through a series of 4 to 6 or 7 matches where he'll have a permanent form boost. And this is just because he's a young player and he's going to experience a large amount of growth, especially if you pair him with players that give stat or training boosts through team roles. Now, there's a huge difference between Ronaldo and Van Dijk. I was blown away with the fact that although Ronaldo didn't have any of the worst form games, 12% of the time he was performing under his listed skill level. In comparison, Van Dijk was on top form for 12% of the time, plus only 2% of the time was underperforming versus his listed skill level. In my opinion, this clearly makes Van Dijk, based on the other players I analyzed, one of the best top-notch value for money players in Master League. This man is going to perform for you almost every single game at his listed or above skill level, 98% of the time. That's amazing. Now let's take a look at Ederson. Ederson only has 5 consistency, but he's a top flight player. You can see here, he never once achieved top form, but consistently underperformed. The form was extremely erratic. 21% of the time, he performed under his listed skill level. That's extremely disappointing for a player of his caliber. Very similar to Schär, who 23% of the time performed under his listed skill level. Those are players I don't think I could ever have in my team. It means 2 or 3 out of every 10 games you play, they're going to be performing under their listed skill level. And then finally, let's look at Yedlin. A rating of 4 conditioning. Doesn't really ever get high form, but also doesn't really ever get low form. Stays pretty firmly in the middle. This is really interesting because 91% of the time he was at or above his listed skill level. And this brings me to my conclusion. I believe every single player in the game has their own form pattern, and I do not believe it's connected to consistency. Some of the form patterns are similar. You can see on the chart here that there are a lot of players that have similar patterns when it comes to specific form tiers. But what I found is you can't take an average of level 8 conditioned players and assume that they're all going to have a similar performance when it comes to form. I believe each player has his own form pattern, and so even if they're a level 8, whether it's driven by a hidden attribute or something that happens in the game per season, that there's something else that's driving their ability to either maintain form, generate good form, or stop themselves from generating bad form. And therefore, I think ultimately we have to test the patterns of every single player or a specific player to truly understand how that player performs over time, as I've done here, so that when you select players, not only for your game, but for your team, that you're selecting players in your squad that are going to give you a level of consistency, and they're always available to deliver a performance at minimum at their skill level. All right, guys. If you like this, let me know. I can take a look at some specific players or specific scenarios, but I thought this was really interesting. I hope you did too. All right, guys. Thanks. See you next time. Hey, guys. I'm new to YouTube, so if you like the content, please give me a like. If you like the topics, please subscribe, and always leave a comment if you can. Thanks, guys.